All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to transform what is basically a dense list of 50 real estate terms into your ultimate survival guide for the Canadian rental market. Whether you're hunting for your very first apartment or you've been renting for years, the entire landscape of housing is built fundamentally on contracts. So we're going to unpack the vocabulary of official tenancy frameworks to give you a crystal clear understanding of the legal basics of renting.
So I want you to ask yourself this right now. Do you actually know your legal rights as a tenant? Because let's be real, understanding this specific vocabulary isn't just about passing a pop quiz. It's about legally protecting yourself from the absolute second you start looking for a place. Every single term we're going to discuss today acts as a shield or a tool in your rental journey. Think of it like a map. If you don't know the words, you can't read the map, and you definitely can't defend your boundaries.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the rental contract basics, then move into financial rules and rent, explore your living rights and maintenance obligations, and finally, we'll wrap up with disputes and ending leases. Okay, Section 1, the rental contract basics, knowing the players and the paperwork.
Well, every binding contract starts with two main players. On the left, we have the tenant, sometimes formally called the lessee. That is you, the person paying for the right to actually occupy the space. And on the right, you've got the landlord, or lessor, the entity that owns the property and grants you that right. Pinning down exactly who is literally the bedrock of a lease agreement. It dictates exactly who provides the habitable space and who is on the hook to pay for it.
Now, when you're signing that paperwork, you're looking at a classic trade-off between security and flexibility. A fixed-term lease locks everybody in for a predetermined period, usually a year. So you get great security, but way less flexibility if you want to leave. A month-to-month tenancy, on the other hand, auto-renews at the end of each month. That gives you the freedom to leave with proper notice, but it might mean a little less long-term stability depending on your local laws. Choosing the right one essentially sets the timeline for your entire stay.
Moving on to Section 2, Financial Rules and Rent, Securing Your Unit. Getting the keys is actually a pretty strict legal sequence because landlords need to mitigate their risk. First up, they check your reliability with a reference letter and proof of employment. Next is the credit check, which is a hard look at your financial history. Once you clear that, you hit Step 3, handing over a security or damage deposit. This is a legally capped amount of money held in trust just in case you damage the unit. And finally, Step 4 is the move-in inspection. You guys, do not skip this. Documenting the physical condition of the place before you move a single box in is your absolute best defense for getting that deposit back later.
Now, if your credit history is a little thin, you might need a guarantor or co-signer to legally back you up. Once you are approved, you'll set up your payments. In Canada, this often means writing a year's worth of future post-dated checks. Pro tip here, always ask for a rent receipt to build a paper trail. Also, if you move in mid-month, you'll calculate what's called prorated rent, meaning you only pay for the exact days you lived there. And lastly, make sure you know exactly who pays for what. Are water and heat covered under utilities included, or are you suddenly going to be hit with a separate utility bill and extra building strata or condo fees?
All right, let's jump to Section 3, Living Rights and Maintenance, your home and your peace.
In a tight housing market with a notoriously low vacancy rate, just finding a place, whether that's a detached house, a private condominium, or a basement suite, is half the battle. But honestly, no matter the property type, clarity is absolutely crucial before you sign anything. You have to make sure your contract specifies what's legally included. Is the unit furnished or unfurnished? Do you get official access to building amenities like the gym or the pool? Which specific fixtures and appliances come with the space? And is it formally classified as pet-friendly? Because remember, if it is not written down in the lease, it doesn't exist.
Okay, let's talk about your fundamental rights. Your landlord is legally required to maintain the property in a habitable condition. Now, this isn't just about the place looking nice. It's a strict, non-negotiable standard of safety and cleanliness. If your heating completely dies in the middle of a freezing winter, or if the roof is caving in, the property is no longer in a habitable condition, and the landlord is legally obligated to fix it immediately.
Now, this is a really vital legal concept to burn into your memory: quiet enjoyment. Despite how it sounds, it doesn't mean your neighbors have to whisper. In renting terms, quiet enjoyment means your landlord cannot unreasonably interfere with your life. They can't just drop by and announce to check on things, they can't harass you, and they certainly cannot lock you out of agreed-upon areas. When you pay your rent, you are quite literally buying the exclusive, undisturbed use of that space.
So, building on that last point, what if the owner actually does need to come inside? Like, say they have to fix a leaky pipe or show the unit to a future tenant. Well, they're required by law to give you a notice to enter. This is a mandatory advance written warning. In most jurisdictions, this is a strict 24-hour minimum heads up. They cannot just pull out their master key and waltz in. Doing that is a direct illegal violation of your right to quiet enjoyment.
Of course, things will break. Pipes leak, pests show up. When the unavoidable happens, you'll submit a formal maintenance request to the property manager or the building superintendent. Now, a huge thing to note here is the difference between actual damage you caused and simple wear and tear. Wear and tear is just the natural, expected deterioration of a space from everyday use, and you are not financially on the hook for that. Also, if your life circumstances completely change and you need to leave for a bit, this is when you'll have to navigate the specific rules for bringing in a subtenant through a formal sublet agreement.
Finally, Section 4, disputes and ending leases, when things go wrong or when they just naturally end. Look, a very common dispute always comes down to money, which is exactly why this next term matters so much. The Rent Control Guideline is a set of provincial government regulations that strictly caps how much your landlord can increase your rent each year. So, if they try to hike your rent by 10% when the government guideline says 2%, you now have the vocabulary and the legal right to push back and say no to that illegal increase.
But hey, on the flip side, tenants have strict obligations too. If you fail to pay your rent as agreed, you default on rent. That pile of unpaid, past due money is known legally as rent arrears. And falling into rent arrears puts you in extremely dangerous financial territory because it opens the door for the landlord to legally start the termination process. When either the landlord or the tenant totally fails to perform a term of the agreement without a valid legal excuse, that is a breach of contract. But you don't just stand out in the hallway and scream at each other. You enter a formal dispute resolution process. In Canada, this is generally facilitated by a provincial government agency, like the Residential Tenancy Branch, or RTB for short. They basically step in and act as a specialized court to fairly resolve the conflict.
Now let's say you just decide to leave peacefully. You can't just pack up your car and ghost your landlord. There are strict chronological steps. First, you have to honor the notice period. That's the required advance warning time, which is usually around 30 to 60 days. You have to hand over a written notice of termination, and finally, you do a formal move-out inspection with the landlord. You'll systematically compare the current state of the apartment against that initial move-in checklist we talked about, finalize the end of the contract, and hopefully get your full deposit back.
However, if things go completely south and a severe breach occurs, we're talking massive property damage, illegal activities, or deep rent arrears, the landlord might issue an eviction notice. And this isn't just a strong suggestion, it is a formal, legally enforceable document ordering a tenant to vacate the premises. But even then, an eviction has to follow very strict procedures and timelines. A landlord cannot legally just change the locks and throw your stuff on the lawn themselves.
Understanding these 50 terms totally transforms you. You go from being just a vulnerable applicant hoping for the best to an empowered, informed renter who knows the legal basics of renting. Because at the end of the day, the law is really only as protective as your understanding of it. So, now that you are armed with the vocabulary to defend your boundaries, what hidden clauses are you going to look out for the next time a landlord hands you a pen? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.